Australia is a country most people think they understand. Beaches, kangaroos, the Sydney Opera House. A laid-back culture where everyone surfs and throws shrimp on the Barbie. But the real Australia, the one hiding beneath that sun-bronzed postcard image, is so dangerous, so ancient, so legally bizarre, and so geographically extraordinary that by the end of this video you will never see Australia the same way again. Let us start with the single most important fact about Australia that most people never fully grasp. Australia is not just a country, it is an entire continent. The only nation on Earth that occupies a complete continent entirely by itself. And that continent is trying to kill you. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, literally. Australia contains more species of venomous and deadly creatures than any other country on Earth, and many of them exist nowhere else in the world. Australia has 21 of the 25 most venomous snakes on Earth. The inland taipan, found in remote Queensland, is the most venomous snake on the planet. A single bite contains enough venom to kill 100 adult humans. Australia also has the world's most venomous spider, the world's most venomous jellyfish, the world's most venomous fish. Australia also has world's most venomous octopus, the blue-ringed octopus, which is small enough to fit in the palm of your hand and has no antivenom. None. If it beats you, medicine cannot save you. Only a machine breathing for you while the venom passes through your system gives you any chance of survival. And yet, here's the extraordinary paradox at the heart of Australian life. Despite being surrounded by the most concentrated collection of deadly wildlife on Earth, Australia has one of the lowest rates of death by animal attack of any country in the world. Australians have simply learned to coexist with creatures that would paralyze most of the rest of humanity with fear. Australians check their shoes before putting them on every morning. They look before they reach into dark spaces. They treat danger not as something to fear, but as something to manage. This is perhaps the most distinctly Australian thing about Australia. Now here's a fact about Australian history that will genuinely shock you. Australia fought a war against emu and lost. In 1932, the Australian government deployed soldiers armed with machine guns to Western Australia to cull the emu population that was destroying crops across the region. The soldiers fired thousands of rounds of ammunition at the emus over several weeks. The emus, moving in small scattered groups, proving impossible to herd into kill zones, and apparently capable of absorbing machine gun rounds and continuing to run, comprehensively defeated the Australian military. The operation was officially abandoned. The emus won. This event is recorded in Australian history as the Great Emu War. Australia also has a relationship with its own geography that most people find almost impossible to comprehend. The Australian outback, the vast red interior of the continent, covers approximately 70% of the entire country. It is one of the most hostile, most remote, and most ancient landscapes on Earth. The rock formation, known as Uluru, sacred to the Anangu Indigenous people, is estimated to be around 550 million years old. For context, that is older than the first fish, older than the first land plants, older than almost every form of complex life that has ever existed on this planet. Uluru was already ancient when dinosaurs were young. Here is something about Australian law that no tourist expects. In Victoria, Australia, it is illegal to wear pink hot pants after midday on a Sunday. In Queensland, it is illegal to own a pet rabbit unless you are a magician who uses it in a performance. In Western Australia, it is illegal to possess more than 50 kilograms of potatoes at one time. A law that has been on the books since the 1940s, when the Potato Marketing Corporation controlled potato distribution across the state. Australia has some of the most extraordinary, most specific, and most completely real strange laws of any country on Earth. Australia also has a voting law that surprises almost every American who hears it. In Australia, voting in federal elections is compulsory. Not encouraged, not incentivized. Compulsory. Every eligible Australian citizen is legally required by law to show up at a polling place on election day. Failure to vote without a valid excuse results in an immediate fine. Australia decided that democracy was too important to leave to voluntary participation, and built a legal system that treats voting not as a right you can choose to exercise, but as a civic obligation you are legally required to fulfill. The result of compulsory voting is one of the highest voter participation rates of any democracy in the world, consistently above 90%. For comparison, American presidential elections typically see voter turnout between 50 and 60%. Australia looked at the problem of voter apathy and solved it with a fine. It is either the most sensible or the most Australian solution to a democratic problem imaginable, depending entirely on your perspective. Here is an Australian geographical fact that sounds like it was invented for a quiz show. Australia is wider than the moon. The diameter of the moon is approximately 3,470 kilometers. The width of the Australian continent from its easternmost to westernmost point is approximately 4,000 kilometers. Australia, a single country on a single continent, is physically wider than an entire celestial body orbiting the Earth. This fact appears in Australian primary school geography lessons. It never stops being extraordinary. Australia also has a relationship with Indigenous culture that is simultaneously one of the oldest and most complex in the world. Aboriginal Australians are the oldest continuous civilization on Earth. Current scientific and archaeological evidence suggests Aboriginal Australians have lived continuously on the continent for at least 65,000 years, possibly longer. For context, the pyramids of Egypt were built approximately 4,500 years ago. Aboriginal Australian civilization predates the Egyptian pyramids by over 60,000 years. The oldest continuous culture on Earth is Australian. And here is the part of Australian history that the postcard image never shows. When British colonists arrived in Australia in 1788, they applied a legal doctrine called terra nullius, meaning land belonging to nobody, to justify their claim to the entire continent. Under this doctrine, the British legally declared that Australia had no prior owners, despite the presence of an estimated 500,000 to 1 million Aboriginal people who had lived there for 65,000 years. Terra nullius was not overturned by the Australian High Court until 1992, 204 years after colonization began. For over 2 centuries, Australian law officially maintained that the oldest civilization on Earth did not legally exist. The consequences of colonization for Aboriginal Australians were catastrophic. Within decades of British arrival, the Aboriginal population collapsed by an estimated 90% through disease, violence, and displacement. The stolen generations, a policy of forcibly removing Aboriginal children from their families and placing them with white Australian families or institutions, continued from the 1910s until the 1970s. The Australian government issued a formal national apology for the stolen generations in 2008. The speech was delivered by Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, was watched live by millions of Australians. Many described it as the most significant moment in modern Australian public life. Here's a fact about Australian wildlife that goes beyond the deadly creatures most people know about. Australia is home to the platypus, an animal so biologically extraordinary that when European scientists first received a preserved specimen in 1799, they believed it was a hoax constructed by a taxidermist, a mammal that lays eggs, has a duckbill, has beaver-like webbed feet, has a beaver tail, has venomous spurs on its hind legs capable of delivering excruciating pain, and detects prey using electroreception, sensing the electrical fields generated by the muscles of other animals, exactly like a shark. The platypus is nature's most improbable animal. It is exclusively Australian. Australia also holds a world record that most people find completely counterintuitive for a country famous for its dangerous wildlife. Australia is one of the safest countries in the world to live in. It consistently ranks in the top 5 globally for human development, life expectancy, quality of health care, and personal safety. A country where the local spiders can kill you, the jellyfish can kill you, the snakes can kill you, the ocean can kill you, and the sun can give you the highest rates of skin cancer in the world, is simultaneously one of the places on Earth where human beings live the longest and most comfortable lives. Australia is dangerous and safe at exactly the same time. Here's something about the Australian economy that most people outside Australia do not know. Australia has not experienced a technical recession, defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth for over 30 years. From 1991 until the COVID-19 pandemic forced a brief interruption in 2020, Australia experienced the longest uninterrupted period of economic growth of any developed nation in recorded history. 29 consecutive years of economic expansion. Through the Asian financial crisis, through the dot-com crash, through the global financial crisis of 2008 that devastated almost every other developed economy on Earth. Australia kept growing. Economists still debate exactly how. Australia also has a unique geopolitical reality that most people never consider. Australia is a Western, English-speaking, European heritage democracy, located in the Asia-Pacific region, directly in the sphere of influence of the world's most rapidly growing economies and military powers. Australia is geographically closer to Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste than it is to any European nation. It is closer to China than it is to the United Kingdom. Australia is simultaneously deeply culturally connected to the Western world and geographically embedded in a region where the balance of global power is shifting faster than anywhere else on Earth. This tension defines almost every major Australian foreign policy decision of the 21st century. Here is a final Australian fact that brings everything together. Australia has a fence, not a garden fence, not a border fence. A fence that stretches for over 5,600 kilometers across the Australian continent, making it the longest fence on Earth. The dingo fence, built in the 1880s and still maintained today, was constructed to keep wild dingoes away from sheep farming areas in southeastern Australia. It runs through some of the most remote, most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Teams of workers patrol and repair it continuously. The entire purpose of the longest fence on Earth is to keep one species of wild dog away from sheep. This is Australia solving a problem in the most Australian way imaginable. Australia is a continent that tried to kill its own settlers from the moment they arrived. It contains ancient rocks that predate complex life on Earth, a civilization 65,000 years old. Animals that evolution apparently designed as a practical joke, a military defeat at the hands of birds, the longest fence on Earth built to stop one type of dog, compulsory voting enforced by fines, and some of the strangest laws ever written by any democratic government. And yet, it has produced one of the most prosperous, most livable, most genuinely extraordinary societies in human history. Australia does not make sense. It is too big, too empty, too dangerous, too ancient, too isolated, and too unlikely to have produced what it has produced. And that is precisely what makes it one of the most fascinating countries on Earth. A place where the oldest human culture on the planet coexists with one of the newest and most successful modern democracies, where deadly creatures share space with some of the world's happiest people, where the land itself is so extraordinary that simply existing on it every day is a kind of miracle. Subscribe to Untold Facts because the world is full of stories like this one that nobody is telling loudly enough.